few people that are here. This is great. Going to give a little talk here on Backstop.JS and preventing visual regression. Out of this group, has anybody used Backstop.JS before, or are they familiar with it? Just a quick show of small hands. Awesome. Hope my team better raise their hand. That's great. So hopefully we can just sort of get into some of the introductory stuff. Maybe since we have a smaller group, we can jump into some QA. And if you have questions or problems that you've had, we can get into those. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Ian Mullinder. I am the head of development at iFactory. We're a Boston-based digital agency. We're right on Tremont Street, right on the Commons downtown. We serve mainly higher ed clients, a lot of colleges, community colleges, state colleges, Ivy League schools, you name it, we've worked with it and are currently working with them. We also have some clients that are in healthcare, not-for-profit industry. We also have our toes in some publishing groups and working with them as well. We have about 30 employees all in New England. The development team is mainly remote, but we are all in New England. Myself, Adam down front here, we're in Maine. Some people up in New Hampshire, Rhode Island, for example. So we're really based here in New England. Just a quick run through, we're going to talk real quick about what visual regression actually is. Give you a quick introduction to Backstop for those of you who haven't used it or come across it yet and why it's a valuable tool. Since it's in the realm of JavaScript, it's a crowded place. So why did we choose Backstop compared to some of the other tools that are out there? I'll touch on that really quick as well. And then because I like to see what things are, I'm going to actually open up my editors, share with you some examples, how to get things set up and really running. And then after we've done that, I want to talk a little bit about the workflow. How do we fit this into our team as a relatively small development group with 7 of us in the agency? How do we work together? How do we make use of the tests that we have? And how can we pass this off to other clients, other development partners, so they can work within the same test that we're writing? And then I want to share just a few tips and a few things around the visual regression testing that, getting up to speed with Backstop, because it's a finicky thing. It takes some getting used to. And then hopefully, like I said, we'll have plenty of time for some questions and answers should you have anything. And I'll be around afterwards as well if you have anything. So visual regression, what is it? Basically, in general, it's if you go and you run some updates or you update your code and your front end changes, so the design actually changes itself. So what I have up on the screen here is sort of an example. It's actually an output from Backstop being run, where we have a reference file, which is our baseline. Whenever you hear reference, think this is our baseline test. A test image, which is what we're testing against, and then the diff. So this is the tool actually saying, hey, this is different. A nice visual indicator. This is different. This is what we're looking for. And you can see down below with some headlines, some H2 text, just seeing the capitalization difference, and it flags that for you. So why does it happen? I'd love to say it never happens. We're great developers. Everybody we work with is great developers, and we never make mistakes. It's perfect, right? We see it a lot with module updates within Drupal. You're working with paragraphs, they change something, it breaks what you have. You'll see a little error. It might not be visual, but it's changing the output and what's on your screen itself. Poorly scoped CSS, especially in early development. You create your feature, you don't target it specific enough, you're not using BEM or some other, framework or methodology. And that sort of spills and causes errors in other areas that you don't want it to do. When you introduce new JavaScript to your site, functionality changes. There are a number of places, outdated plugins, you can just think of it as your site goes on and on and on. Things will start to unravel from time to time. So testing for regression, I sort of alluded to this before, but there are 3 real main concepts here, and think of it sort of like a workflow or a circle. You're going to start with a reference. This is the baseline. What is the current state that you want to test against? Like, what is accepted? And typically, if you're in a production environment, that's going to be your live site. Like, we don't want this to change. If you're in early development, it's, hey, me, the developer, I've done my tests, I've checked it in browsers, I think this is now approved. So that's your baseline. So what we'll do is we'll take these, baseline, place and starting point, and then we'll run some tests. We'll make some changes, we'll run updates, whatever it may be, and then we'll take a test and compare those screenshots to our baseline. Do they match? Are the changes expected in early development? Like, did I fix the bug that was actually there? Because that would change that reference, and that's actually a good place where you want to see that change. And then, if your test is exactly what you expect it to be and everything, the changes that are introduced are important, or whether, hey, I ran my security updates or my migration and everything went perfect, it looks exactly like it's supposed to, then you approve it. So that takes the test and then creates it. That is now your baseline. That's your approved test. You have a new reference point. So really just think of that as you go through, and Backstop makes this really easy, simple commands to get reference, test, and approve in place. So, Backstop.JS. Backstop is a visual regression testing framework built on Node.js, and basically what it does is it automates the visual regression testing. So instead of having two windows open, comparing them side by side, it's going to take the screenshots, overlay it, and just tell you right there whether something's wrong or not. It's a very easy, quick uptake module to get into at a high level. Once you start digging deeper, like I said, it can get a little frustrating at times trying to figure out what's going on, and we'll talk about some of those issues later. Some of the features that it has that I really, really like, the in-browser and the command line reporting are awesome. To be able to visually see, like, my test failed and here's the reason why it failed, that is great feedback if I'm working with a development group saying, hey, your change, your new feature just affected all of this stuff here. Please get this fixed. It's good to just be able to show them that instead of just writing in a ticket or taking a screenshot that you have to annotate and mark up. It's just right there in front of you, and hopefully they're running the tests appropriately on their own end, so you don't even have to QA that bug that's right there. And then it becomes those in-between cases that you don't have a test for that you wrote. Backstop is pretty awesome because since it's built in Node, you can run it as a standalone app, so I could package up an application, give it to you, and you can run it within your project, which is great. For the sake of this talk, we're just going to really focus on it being installed globally as an application on your computer and running that way. But do know that you can make it a standalone app. Some of the other things you can do is simulate user interactions. Websites are not static. They haven't been for a long time. So you have interactions where you're clicking, you're hovering, you're waiting for animations to finish. You need to fill in forms, search forms, see how they act. Is the autocomplete working like you expect it to? All of that can be done with this, and they really leverage Puppeteer and Chromie for those, and please do dig into those if you're curious. And then ultimately, it is version control friendly, which is super important when it comes to the workflow, and how do you pass this off? How do I get my changes to court so she can test against her stuff, and how can she give me her test so I can test her stuff? Super important. So, like I mentioned earlier, Backstop is one of many, many, many tools out there that can do this for you. There are some tools. BBC, for example, has Wraith, which is out there, which is super popular and one that I dug into for a while. There are hosted solutions such as N-Test, where you can actually go to their website and do some of the visual regression and write some of your tests there and have it sort of on an online suite. Pantheon just acquired, Staging Pilot, I believe is the name of it, and they're going to provide that within their system too for continuous integration, I guess. It looks awesome, it's great. There are tons of tools. So why Backstop? We use Gulp, we use NPM already, we use Node, so it fit like a glove into our workflow. Why would we want to introduce Ruby into making sure other developers or vendors are using Ruby to work with? It's super easy to share, and once again, the configuration, as you're going to see here in a little bit, is just very straightforward. If things are trending like they are, I can definitely see a host like Pantheon or somebody like that sort of taking this over, and maybe we don't need to worry about some of these tests and it'll do some things on its own. But I believe it's really going to be critical, and all of the principles sort of hold as we get in through things. So that's a pretty high level introduction, really quick into it, because I want people to actually see what it is we're working with, and what does this do, and how quick and easy is it to get something up. So with that in mind, some assumptions that I'm making before we jump into this. So you would need to have Node.js installed, first and foremost. It won't run without it. I'm also assuming that Backstop is installed globally, so I'm not going to be passing flags to it to actually run in what we're going to go through here in a little bit. And then we're going to work with defaults for many options. As you're going to see when we open up a config after we initialize Backstop, there are tons of options. Timing, selectors, all sorts of stuff. We're just going to work with sort of the top level and focus on a few things. I do encourage you to dig deeper, though, because it's super powerful in what you can do without even getting into your own user scripts and custom JavaScript for things. So we really are only scratching the surface here. So with that in mind, I'm going to pull up Visual Studio Code here. Hopefully everybody can see that okay. Tried to find one with good contrast, so let's see how this goes. So first and foremost, I'm in my web root for my project. It's just a very simple site. There's not much to it. I've got it pulled up here for you. We're just looking at a very simple key screen. And what we're going to do is just sort of initialize Backstop first and foremost. So to do that, since I have Node installed, it's very easy. It's just Backstop init. That command right there is going to go and it's going to say, okay, we need to create a configuration file, which we'll come back to here in a second, this Backstop.JSON that you see. And then it also creates a Backstop data folder, and this is pretty important. Backstop data is where your test images and your reference images are going to be held. The engine scripts folder here are a lot of the defaults for some of the custom actions you might do, such as maybe you have personalization on your site, and if a user clicks a link, you want to show a different theme or a different object or something. You need to set a cookie or tell the browser that you're testing in, hey, we need to test this state as well as the other states that we have. And all of that can be done through this directory here. So we'll keep an eye on that and sort of reference some of that when we come back to it. But like I mentioned, the important file here is Backstop.JSON. This is the default configuration that's opened up, and it gives you just about everything you need to see to start running tests, and then some. So you'll see a lot of empty variables down here in the scenarios. We'll talk about what some of those do there. But it gives you that starting point. So you can have a test up and running. I can get this going in less than a couple minutes to take a screenshot of a test and compare. And so Adam was just working on a migration the other day. Let's get him set up so we can actually test the live environment versus his local environment to get things going. Didn't take too long. And that's one of the things I really like about it. So within this file, the ID, we end up naming it to the project that we're working on. Just give it an ID, a client name, a theme within Drupal, whatever sort of makes sense for you. Viewports, I'm sure we can all guess what that does. That pretty much defines the viewport that you're going to be taking it at. So by default, it comes with a phone and a tablet viewport size, and what we're going to do is we also need to test on desktops. So desktop, we'll set it to 1200 pixels. That's that. So now I'm saying with all these scenarios, unless I define it elsewhere, we're going to take a screenshot of each one of those resolutions. And one thing to bear in mind, it's the viewport height is really just telling the browser, this is how big I want you to be. If you don't specify within your scenario, it will take a screenshot of the entire page. So if you're not saying selector or only take, scroll to this place and take a shot, or take one that's 100, 1024 pixels high, it will just take your entire screenshot. So you'll see that in the first test that we run real quick. The on before script, what that is that's where you would write any JavaScript that you want before the page actually loads itself. So if I need to log into a website and authenticate, I would do that through that, on before.js or whatever my custom script is that I want to call there, or multiple scripts. Since it's JavaScript, you can have, call other modules or whatever you need to. The onReady script, that will run when the page is actually loaded. So when that comes up, you can do hover interactions, maybe some more complicated things that you need to do for every single one of your tests, like maybe you're testing a different contrast and you want to make sure, okay, I click that and I set that for every single screenshot, let's make sure it works. And then we get to sort of the meat of everything, and these are the scenarios. So when you see scenario, think test. This is where you're going to write your test case to create some of this stuff. So for our first thing, I just want to basically take a simple key screen, a snapshot of that web page that we had up. One thing that I recently learned, which is super handy, is when writing scenarios, so you imagine a website that grows over time, you're going to have many, 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 many scenarios that you're going to test against. Creating reference files, as you see, takes time to do. So you're taking screenshots, opening your browser, taking a screenshot, opening another one over and over and over and over again. So if you give your label, and I like to think of it almost like BEM convention style naming, then you can use regex to run only those scenarios if you want. So I don't have to run references for every key screen. I can run them against a single key screen, or I can run them against all the key screens and ignore maybe some of the components that I'm trying to take screenshots of throughout everything. So that's just sort of a little tip, something that I really just learned, which is nice. Cookies, like we mentioned, you can feed it a cookie path. In this case, we're not dealing with cookies. It's just a simple site that we're taking a screenshot on, not a big deal. The URL that we have here, you'll see two fields. We have URL and a reference URL. The URL is the page that you want to actually test. So that's the one that I want to take the test screenshot of to compare against my reference file. Reference URL, it can be blank. So you can create your references from that URL and also test against the same URL. So if you're in early development, that's sort of what you're doing. I'm working locally. Did my test pass? Did it fail? What are things looking like? When you're in production, that's where you might want to put your live site URL to actually compare and say, take a screenshot of this page, compare it to my local or my dev environment. Are we still in good shape or not? So that's what you want there. Ready event and ready selector are both cues to wait until something happens. And this is a good time to point out, within scenarios, they read from top to bottom. So they happen sequentially from top to bottom. And that's important to know if you start running into timing issues. So ready event is if I wanted to write a string to the console, for example, like I need to wait for this to go and then run my test, essentially. We can do that there. Ready selector, make sure that this, accordion is on the page and it's fully loaded before actually taking my screenshot. Delay, maybe there's an interaction, like your home page, your hero image fades in a little bit, you can set a delay and wait for that to take a screenshot until after it's faded in. Hide selectors and remove selectors, this is handy. Sometimes you just don't want to take, like maybe you have an ad or a live chat thing, which we see all the time on your website, and you don't want to include that in your screenshot at all. So I could say either hide selectors, which would basically set a visibility hidden to that, or I can say remove the selectors, and that would be a display none, and it would just completely remove it out. So it's just two different ways to get around that. Hover selector, click selector sound exactly what they are. Do you want to hover over a button and see what the state is when you're over it? And then, click selector, we'll use that in a little bit with another test, but okay, click it, see what happens, take a screenshot. The post-interaction wait is just what it sounds like again. You know, it's wait X amount of milliseconds after you do an interaction, either the hover or the click. Selectors is going to, what selectors, do you want to take a screenshot of just a specific selector? So this is really nice in early development, because if I'm building out my accordion, I don't want to take a screenshot of the entire key string, because that's always going to change. So I'm always going to get failed tests in that cases. But if my accordion is completely built out, everything's been tested, I have tests against those, I can just target that and take a screenshot of only that element. So early in the process, that's great, but as you get farther down the road, you might want to think about different ways of going about that, because you'll get tests that are, you know, like I said, 50, 100, you know, scenarios long, and it takes a while to run all that stuff. Selector expansion, if it's set to true, it's going to take a screenshot of everything, every accordion that's on the page. So if there's 3, it'll take a screenshot of each one as a different case. If you set it to false, it'll just do the first one and default to that. Expect is something I haven't used often, but it's pretty cool, I guess, in what it does. Say I have 7 items in my navigation, I can feed it that selector, and if there's only 6, it'll fail automatically. Like visually, it makes sense, but if something was collapsed and you're testing, maybe they need to be there for accessibility purposes. So let's make sure that they're available to the screen reader and we can see them on the screen itself. Mismatch threshold, I found the 0.1 is pretty good in terms of what it is, but that basically is how many pixels off can this be before it gets flagged as a failed test. Require same dimensions is the same idea. Like, is this object the same size as it was? If not, fail the test. So like I said, these run from top to bottom, so just keep that in mind as we go through things. But what we did already here is we've instituted a test, basically. So what I can do at this point is actually run reference. So Backstop reference is going to create my reference files. Remember, that's that baseline that it's creating. So it's going through, and you can see right here, it's opening a browser, Chromium, which comes packaged with Backstop. It's setting a cookie, which we cleared out, so it doesn't look for that cookie, which is nice. And it's generating these key screens, or these screenshots. And you can see up here in Backstop data, it created that bitmaps reference, and we now have those 3 tests, essentially. So I have 1 URL that I'm testing, 3 different viewports, and it's creating those. So everything's working. We didn't get any errors. It's great. We're in good shape. We now have a baseline, so you can imagine this is the production site, more or less. We're good to go, right? Well, we need to make some changes. So we want to see what something looks like when it fails. I can do backstop test, and it better pass, essentially, at this point. We haven't made any changes. Here it is. It pops things up. You can see things. It helps if I feed it the right URL in the test itself. And then we'll backstop reference again. And then test. So this will come back hopefully with a pass test with the right URL and the right page to test against, because we'd be sitting here all day if it doesn't. And there we go. So 3 pass tests, 0 failed. So this is that visual report essentially, and this is going to come in handy when you see an actual error. But the idea is I have all my tests, 3 of them passed, 0 of them failed. If I hover over this, or if I toggle this here, I can show the text info, which gives me the information about the test that I just ran. What's the difference percentage? You know, maybe I'm expecting a change, but it wasn't there. Maybe my mismatch threshold is too low, so I need to specify it a little more. So it really does a good job of trying to give that to you. You can see phone, tablet, desktop, all there, which is pretty great. So what happens when something fails? We're going to just go ahead and make a quick change here and imagine you just ran a security update and this thing, it changed and you didn't know it. And in security updates, you get a lot of changes. You see a lot of files change in your repo. If you're a good developer, you walk through all of them and make sure nothing really conflicted, but we know how that goes sometimes. Let it go. So I ran some updates. Backstop. Test that again. What's going to happen is it should flag that something failed. And that's good for this, because that's what we really want to see happen. We want to know that we're catching the issues that are being presented to us. So as you can see here, we have 2 pass tests and 1 failed. And that's because there was a breakpoint in place, obviously, so it only changes on the large screen. But pass tests, I'm interested in the failed one. What happened here? So I have my reference file, which is great. It shows me a screenshot. Like I said, we didn't specify a selector or a height in the test itself. It just captures the entire page, everything that's on it, as it is at that browser width. The test one, here, as we go through, if you have a really keen eye, sure, maybe you saw what the change is, but are you really going to know, and would you see the impact over other pages if they weren't laid out this way? As soon as you lay the diff over it, you start to see, all right, something really changed here. And you can see, all right, here's the difference, what's going on. They've got this cool little scrubber, and it's awesome for people. It's a cool thing to show off, where you can just really scroll and see, all right, something changed here. Padding, margin, what happened, what's going on. Boom, we have a failed test, we know what it is, we can go fix it, and it's not in our production environment, which is most important, I think, at this point. So let's assume that we're just going to say, yeah, we made this change, we expected this to change, and we want to accept this test, and this is now going to become our new baseline. So within that, all right, it's great, everything looks good, backstop, approve. What that's going to do is it's going to, and it tells you right here, it's copying that information from my test to my reference file, and it's saying, all right, we've got a new baseline, we're good to go. Great, we just, made our change, it's approved, I push it up, we merge it into production, nobody's, we get exactly what we're looking for. So, that's awesome, but what else can it do? I mean, like I said, it's not... The web has interactions, it has other things. Sure, a key screen is great, let's do that. But let's take it a little bit further and sort of show an interaction and how we would capture against that. So I'm just going to create another scenario here. We're going to call it search toggle. And we're going to run it against the same page, because it's in the header, it's on every page of the site. And what I'm going to basically test is we have an open state for this search, so it's closed and it's open. We want to make sure that this stuff doesn't change either. Going to go in there. What we're looking to do here is we have a selector. I know what the selector is, so I'm going to go ahead and capture that. Oh, I have a different theme on. Maybe that's what's going on. So I would know when I click, on a click selector, search toggle. So when that toggle is clicked, we need to then take a screenshot after that and see what's going on. So the cool thing here is, so I have a new test now that I just wrote in a couple seconds with other people staring at me. And then I just want to run a reference for that test. So imagine you have 100 tests, 200 tests. You don't want to recreate all of those references. Backstop, reference, filter equals search toggle. So that's just going to choose one of my 2 scenarios, and it's going to say, just run references for that file. Don't go through everything else. So now I have those reference files. I can do the same thing with test, which is great. So it's just going to run that test, and hopefully everything comes back, as you would expect. Now with interactions, sometimes it's potentially you could run into issues where the interaction didn't happen fast enough, or you needed to set a delay or timeout. So just be aware of that in case those things come up. The more mature Backstop gets, the better it is at recognizing an interaction happened, let's wait for things to stop on the page. So with the new version 4 or something or other, I haven't had to set the delays quite as much as I did in earlier versions, which is very nice because that got a little frustrating from time to time. And then just to give you a sense of, you know, how accurate things are with the test, if we go in and we just change the opacity of that background and then run another test against that, it's going to get flagged again. It's kind of remarkable how good it gets at detecting where the errors are. Nice little feedback for you, all that stuff. So you can start to see like how great would this be in, you know, QA when you're putting this in front of vendors, when you're working with clients. Are we, you know, getting the changes that we expect if I submit a ticket? It's a pretty powerful tool that you can do. And we're, like I said, we're really just scratching the surface here. I'd love to almost have like a working session to dive a little deeper and talk about things at greater depth, but it is what it is. So with that, we've done a couple tests. You sort of get the idea. How do we now sort of get this to a point where it's in our workflow? Like, how do I get this to Adam so he can run tests, or Court can run tests and do that sort of thing? So first and foremost, version control, we mentioned it was pretty user-friendly. You definitely need to include that Backstop.JS so other people can have the same tests and you can give them your tests and package those up. The Backstop data, within that, the engine scripts that I talked about, that's where you would define some of that custom JavaScript, the before interactions, the setting of cookies, the finding states. You want to include those as well, so other people have that information. A lot of times your tests, as they get more in depth, will rely on that. Some things that we definitely ignore, and you can imagine if you have 100 tests with 3 screenshots taken of each and they're all giant size, you don't want to include those in your Git repository. The nice thing about this is, and we'll see on the next slide, you can go create that test that I wrote and have that same reference image, because you should have the same point that I was. And if you don't, that's a flag that something's wrong with our, maybe your environment, maybe my environment was messed up a little bit, and we can get to the bottom of that there. So we don't want to have the screenshots for the reference of the test and the HTML report. I haven't found a use to get that committed in there either. It relies on the images, so if they're not there, what do you need? I can see maybe somebody wants to have that or share it. I'm not sure. I haven't found it yet, though, but love to hear if somebody else did. Pre-production, which is where we work a lot, because we work and we basically build turnkey sites for our clients and hand them off and say, here it is, run with it now, it's yours. So we work a lot in the pre-production mode. So the idea here is, I'm going to use you, Adam, for some examples here. But Adam made some changes, or we need to run some updates. So I need to pull down the latest code, whether it be to my local machine development environment, make sure that I'm ready to go to run my security updates. I'd have that. I'd pull that code down. First thing I do is create a reference. That's my baseball line. Make sure that I have all of my tests locally that I can compare against. I would then, now that I have my reference, everything's there, I would go ahead and develop my feature. We create a new feature branch, we run the security updates that we need to, and then when we're done with that, before just saying, okay, we're done, we ran them, it's great, we'll run a test. Let's run a test against those reference images and see if this fails. Like, does it fail anywhere? Do we have any issues? What's going on? Hopefully it passes. Or if there are changes, there are expected changes, because that happens as well. But the idea is you want to know what changes are being introduced, good, bad, or in any other way. Once they are, then you can say, okay, I need to create my tests, if there are any at this point, and say, maybe I'm not running a security update, but I'm introducing a new component to the site. Like, now I need to run my tests. Since all the other tests pass, I need to create a test, run my tests, and make sure that they're working the way I need so I can contribute back to the team So I create my feature scenario. When that's good, I make a commit, making sure that I have the Backstop.JS in there, so I have the config that I can pass off, and merge that code back into the feature, master, stage, whichever branch you're working on, and push that code up. Then it just sort of starts all over again. From there you can pull and do the same thing all over. Okay. In production, it's basically the same idea. I mean, the nice thing is, during all of this development, you now have this series of tests that you can always run and see if they're good or not. Sure, an accordion might move, maybe you have to update a test here and there, but the other thing is, with design systems and using reusable components, it's almost like keep a page where all of these components are. Think like design system almost, where I can go in and have all my building blocks, my header, my footer, my components, and reference those to make sure that things are always working the way that they need to. But the same idea, pull down, run my updates, in a feature, test it, create my new scenarios if I have any or need any, and then finalize, merge, and push that code back up. So it really is pretty seamless in getting in there. So what about this? So timing is everything. I've mentioned this a couple times, and like I said, Backstop's getting better. It really is. So this isn't quite the headache it was when I first started working with it, over a year ago or whenever I got interested. If you start getting failed tests that you don't think it is, timing could be the issue. Like your interactions aren't there. I mentioned the homepage hero not fully rendering. Sometimes slideshows, the way Chrome or your headless browser will pop up and render the page. Maybe the carousel started to slide, so you get a diff, but it's not really a diff. So you do get some false positives. You can reduce those by playing with the ready event, the ready selector, the delay, the post interaction wait, the on before scripts or the ready scripts. You can help mitigate some of that if you really need to. But just be aware, sometimes a failed test doesn't mean it didn't work, but just keep an eye on it, essentially. It is more work, and this is the battle, and this is, I know, working with developers, even myself, now I need to write tests against this stuff, like, what are you doing? But once you think about the long-term ramifications, it becomes very easy to see where this becomes beneficial. Like, you want to make sure that this app you built, the website your clients have, whatever the case may be, is really working. So writing tests takes time, but it's worth it ultimately. The debug screen is helpful, and I don't have time to show that, but if I turn the debug flag on in the Backstop.JS on, it would actually pop the window open, and you can see what's actually happening and how it's the screenshot's being taken. So it's super helpful to try to figure out, is it just a timing issue? Is the page not loading at all? I've had times, I think we still have an issue on one of our sites where a test just isn't rendering for whatever reason. Haven't had enough time to look into it, but what's going on there? Not quite sure. Dig into it though, because we're finding more and more use cases for it every day. I mean, at our front-end team, we've been talking about it for a long time now, and just the other day we finally said, Adam, maybe you can use this on the back end to test something that you're working on. It's super beneficial. I mean, it's saved me a few times. I can probably think of a few times it's helped some of my other developers. It just catches you. It prevents the QA from happening. Like, we all know a QA ticket that goes in, that 10-minute task becomes an hour by the time you submit it, do it, understand it, push it back. Try to reduce those. Try to get rid of them. Like, it's just going to save you time in the long run. And once again, we really, really just scratched the surface. There are so many other things you can do. Authentication, keystrokes, crawling, setting up dynamic, URLs to pass things, and we have that in some of our workflow where my local environment URL might be different than Quartz URL. How do we get around that? Because it's JavaScript, we can figure that out and just write some code and be off and running. So there's tons of stuff there. It's pretty good, all things considered, right there. I did want to leave some time. So hopefully people have some questions or thoughts or problems that they've come across with Backstop. Adam?
One thing that bugged me at first was that I thought I needed to define all of those properties for each scenario.
Right.
So I just wanted to plug the idea that you don't have to have all those.
Yeah, you definitely do not, actually. The only ones that are required in this are the URL and the label and the URL, because the label is what sort of is the ID for the test itself, and the URL is where you're testing it. We could remove the rest of those, and it would just take a simple screenshot of that and go. You don't need them there. Backstop puts them there to sort of get you up to speed. This is what we're doing. This is how it works. So kind of like it, you don't need it, and as you start to work through, like you saw me remove the cookie line for that, because if you don't have a cookie, it will try to log a fake one, basically. It doesn't exist, and I don't need to see that in the console every time. It's the end of the day. Yeah.
Do you have any experiences with Diffie, which is a commercial product, and I'm quite sure they also use this service or something similar for visual regression. Have you heard about that?
A paid service called Diffie.
Yeah.
Have I used it? I haven't used Diffie. A lot of them are getting into it, though. I can't imagine it's much different. My guess is you're using the web and probably have a nice user interface to build out your tests. I did dive into N-Test quite a bit, and that was a similar thing where it was using Selenium, and I'm not quite sure for the regression thing. But that's what really piqued my interest in, how do we do this without paying money for it? Because I know there's an open source solution. I haven't, but you're going to see more and more of them. I know cross-browser testing is now doing visual regression there. You need it, I think, with how big things are getting in some of these applications. Like, I think it's important to have. It can catch a potential issue very easily. Why not? And you can integrate it into some continuous integration and stuff, and just have it happen automatically and go through without having to go through okay, did it pass, did it fail, what am I doing? It'll just, commit will go through or stop or not.
Yeah, actually along the lines of what you're just saying, the CI integration, I know a lot of services, like certain CI and stuff, are starting to include, you can include Backstop.JS as well as BHAT.
Yep.
Are you familiar with any integrations between BHAT and Backdrop and sort of tying them in, or do they complement each other in any ways?
I'm sure they can, for sure. It's interesting because when we both, Adam, senior engineer at iFactory, does a lot of the back-end stuff. He went BHAT and I went Backstop, and we sort of went our own ways, and we looked at them very differently and not quite tying them together. Like, we ended up doing a lot of functional testing with the BHAT where the visual regression was there, and we sort of had it back in front end. And I think what we really came to is, why are we doing it this way? Like, maybe we can get in there and start doing some of the screenshot testing and simple interactions with that. But you were using BHAT for content entry and a bunch of things just to make your life easier too. So I haven't looked into it, but I'm sure there's a possibility there, because it's all just, wait, timing, do something. So can you have your JavaScript kick off BHAT to do something, or vice versa? I'm sure you can. Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
Sure. Can you use a different web driver? Like, let's say you're using a remote testing service like Sauce Labs or something like that.
I haven't seen that with just Backstop. I have seen it with Selenium and some other things. For example, in doing this, I was digging into this giant list and sort of looking at, where am I here? The giant list of various services, and one that really sort of piqued my interest was the Index came out with one called Gemini, and they're very Selenium based, and I know that you could with Selenium and pass some things back and forth that way.
So, like, to me, the issue is Internet Explorer. Right?
Well, yeah, and Yes, and that's something that's very important to note too. Like, this isn't going to catch the IE9 fringe case kind of thing. This is using Chrome, so it's really just giving you that quick, is it there or not? You still need a manual QA, in my opinion. You still need to do that, but I think you run under the assumption, like, are you really going to click through every page or test in different browsers every time you run a security update?
Well, sorry,
Yeah.
carrying on, but there's this paid service called Apple Tools Eyes that looks like it's using almost exactly the same diff libraries.
Yeah.
But it actually has an integration with the browser, like Browser Stack or whatever of your
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing it's somebody has written it
Oh,
to work
the-
outside of Chrome.
They're there for sure. I know I mentioned cross-browser testing because they actually have it as part of their service. Like, it's not, hey, use Selenium and extend our service. It's, we do visual regression testing across our browsers. So it's there. And you're going to see more of it, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess related to that, what would you use Selenium for that Backstop?
Selenium's, to me, it's a little more functional based, and you would, Backstop to me is using this quick snapshot. Like, I want to take a snapshot, I want to do this visual regression thing. You can use Casper.js, Selenium, other things to get more of that functionality in there. Selenium you could use probably for some of that authentication, or, hey, I really need to dive deeper into, think like a program finder or something like that. Like, I need to select this, hit submit, scroll. That would be a nightmare to write in this situation, where Selenium has some of that, and I'd probably use that for that sort of more functional testing. This to me is take a quick snapshot in time of the visual state of your site, essentially.
So,
Yeah.
sorry, if you're not done.
No, go ahead, please.
To piggyback off that question, would you say setup time, between Backstop and JS, is Selenium a lot more overhead, a lot more involved to get set up in terms of just ramp up?
I think it is, because it's another tool. I mean, it's more time for sure. I mean, every time you add something else in there, it's going to be some more time. Our needs tend to be, can we do some of this quick function? We build a lot of brochure type sites, so that's what we focus on. Like, we want to make sure things don't break and it looks good, and it's always that marketing piece for our client. Sure, we have functionality and things like that, but they care more about their homepage than that program finder in a lot of cases, and we need to make sure that stays pristine, essentially. Selenium's a larger uptake. Like, the thing that makes this very nice is I work with a lot of development, partners and whatnot. I can hand this off and say, here it is. Here's some easy documentation. Here are the tests. Just build new ones as you build stuff out, and they throw them in there. I'm not even concerned if they run them at that point, but I can run them, and I can check things in QA and make sure that updates aren't breaking things in other areas. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, of course. All right, it's 5:20. We good?
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks.